Hello, you're watching The Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma and I have with me Professor Pant, and today we're going to discuss all about Brexit. This Brexit has been a never-ending drama, if I may call it that. And right now the fight seems to be between the Parliament and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is hell-bent on being seen as a Brexiteer. He's very keen on even going forward to a no-deal Brexit. But the Parliament has passed a law for renegotiation, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So what do you think is going to happen in the coming month for Brexit?
Well, I think it's a very curious case of the leadership changing and the Prime Minister changing in the UK without any actual change on the ground. So if you look at the Parliament and if you look at the factions, they are where they were even during Mr. Johnson's predecessor's time, Theresa May. And she had to go because she was not able to move the debate forward. And yet today we are in a situation where Mr. Johnson is there, and yet he doesn't seem to be able to have a better handle on the situation. Now, where Mr. Johnson differs from his predecessor is that he is convinced and he is keen to take UK out of the European Union by 31st of October, which is the deadline by which Britain has to decide what it wants to do.
Yeah.
And he is convinced that come what may, whether there is a deal with the European Union by 31st of October or not, Britain would take the step forward, which basically means even if there is no deal, he would get out. He would take Britain out of European Union.
But how about the Parliament blocking it by saying that they're not ready for a no deal? So
yes, so the Parliament's contention is, and the majority that got that bill passed was that you have to have a deal in place if you want to get out of the European Union. That's what the majority feel. But the reality is that that majority is also very thin. So what you have in the Parliament is a very splintered arrangement where part of the Labour Party and the opposition, with slight support from the Conservatives, want a deal to be done before Britain leaves European Union. But you have an equally significant Conservative bloc which is keen to get out of the European Union even if there is no deal. So I think the factions remain where they are, and those factions have not changed, and they are not willing to change. No one is even trying to convince the other side anymore. People are very entrenched in their positions, and that leads to this deadlock which we are witnessing today in Parliament.
So is there like a big, right now the situation is that there is a big problem in the British Parliament, and the transparency for which it has been known, right now it's also being used and misused. Do you think that is a situation, and Britain is actually witnessing a very historical moment in its political history?
Yeah, I would say I think it's quite an inflection point, because Britain is a society or a political culture which relies on tradition. They don't have a written constitution. And so those traditions matter. Now in this case, Mr. Johnson seems to be breaking every single of those traditions. He has, for example, his decision to prorogue the Parliament was recently overturned, just this week on Monday, was overturned. Was declared null and void by the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. In fact, it meant that he advised the Queen illegally or unlawfully, which is quite a charge in the British system. That
but even then, he's just staying on.
Yes, his argument is that, look, this is a political decision. Courts have no business to interfere, and therefore my decision to decide as to when Parliament would be convened and prorogued is entirely a political judgment.
Yeah.
So clearly he is rattling a lot of cages. He's willing to shift a lot of the narrative on this issue, because he believes that when he goes, because I think in the end he's taking a political calculation, that if he is able to convince British public that their mandate, the referendum mandate that they delivered to get out of European Union, is not being delivered, not because he doesn't want it, but because the establishment, the courts, the opposition, and even certain sections of the bureaucracy don't want it. So his argument is that if he can convince them, then he wins the next elections. So therefore he's prodding the opposition to go for elections, and which is, I think there is some truth to his claim that, look, the opposition has been saying let's go for elections, that you have no mandate. But when he says, all right, let's go for elections,
Yeah,
they
they
say,
don't
don't go for elections. First, you have this bill passed which says that
Yeah.
basically you can't go out of European Union without a deal.
So is it because of this division within the Conservative Party? There's a big division which is now out in the open. So that's a huge...
See, I think this problem is basically an intra-Tory party problem, which is now out in the open and has sort of infected the body politic of Britain. And that makes it so much more ironic, because it started off by David Cameron deciding that he can permanently keep a lid, put a lid on this problem by going for referendum, because he thought that he goes for a referendum, he wins the referendum where majority of the people will say, no, we want to be part of European Union, and therefore once and for all the debate would die. In fact, exactly the opposite happened. People voted by a small margin, but they voted that Britain should get out of European Union, and therefore the split within the Tory party came out in the open, and David Cameron had to go because he felt that obviously he lost a major referendum, and his successor Theresa May tried very hard to negotiate with Brussels, European Union, and to negotiate with her backbenchers who are who want to get out of European Union, and both sides she could not reconcile. And I think that's the same problem that continues today, with the difference that Mr. Johnson has put his weight behind those backbenchers, behind those who want to leave European Union with or without a deal, and so that changes the dynamic.
So a couple of questions first. What is this no deal? What does it really mean, and how will it affect Britain? What is a no deal? Brexit no deal. Secondly, the people who want to get out of Britain, get out of the European Union, why are they so keen to get out of the European Union? What does Britain, how does it benefit by getting out of the EU?
Well, when the referendum was happening and when the people went out to make their case, a lot of false claims were made. For example, even Mr. Johnson, who was vociferously campaigning to get out of European Union, made a lot of tall claims that if Britain gets out of European Union, we save so much by not giving to Brussels, that amount can be spent in Britain, in the NHS, the health service, education, infrastructure, etc. Britain would not lose much. Britain, after all, can have the direct trade benefits with the European Union, etc. And I think in hindsight, almost all of those claims have proven to be wrong. In fact, most of the reports, serious reports that have come out by, whether it's by the trade bodies, by the civil society, they point a picture that Britain would lose a lot. So you have a situation now where Britain really is contemplating the kind of costs that would be involved. Certainly there will be costs on Europe as well, European Union as well, where they have to prepare for this transition. But I think Britain, because it will be on its own, will have to face a large chunk of this crisis. In fact, some have even speculated that food and medicine shortages might occur.
That doesn't bother Boris Johnson right
now. That
now.
doesn't bother, because I think his calculation is all political. His calculation is that he can win the next elections, and if he can win the next elections, then he can be an epoch-defining prime minister.
So it suits him politically, you're saying?
Politically, it suits him, and I think if you look at the numbers, in the polling, Conservatives are still ahead of the Labour Party. So therefore, he feels that he gets traction when he talks about it.
And when he's talking about this no-deal Brexit, what exactly is the no-deal Brexit that the Parliament does not want, and he's so keen on it?
Well, no-deal Brexit means that on 31st of October, Britain gets out of European Union, that there will be all-round chaos, because there will be no arrangements in place to moderate this transition phase where Britain would be adjusting to European Union's departure from European Union. And that means that all the chaos that you would witness on the borders, on the ports, in terms of transport, in terms of what exports and imports happen between European Union and Britain, also in terms of people. Then here you have big populations of Brits who are living in European Union countries and Europeans who are living in Britain. What happens to them? Nothing would be decided. On 31st October, the two would part ways, and everything would become ad hoc.
So right now, what is the situation? Do you think a no-deal Brexit is going to happen on the 31st of October? How will this coming month unfold? Do you think European Union is prepared for a no-deal Brexit? Would they agree to it if this is
Well, European Union certainly would like a deal to be in place, and I think because that's what makes for an orderly transition to the next phase. But their problem is very similar to what we have been discussing. They feel that Mr. Johnson for better or for worse, is what is available to them. He's the one they have to negotiate with. They can't negotiate with the parliament. But the parliament is so divided that from their perspective, they are not sure that, for example, if they make some concessions today, they say, let's give Mr. Johnson what he wants, let's make some concessions and see if a deal can be put in place. But they are not sure whether those concessions would then get the approval of the parliament in Britain.
Yes.
So for them, it's the uncertainty in the British political system is what is driving them nuts. And I'm assuming that what has happened in the last few days, where the Supreme Court overruled Mr. Johnson, etc., they are looking at it from a distance. But I think they are very careful not to involve themselves in what they consider to be a matter of domestic politics.
But they seem to be dragged into it.
They are part of the discussion. Yes. So and I think they are very concerned about what perhaps can happen for the future. But they have very little leverage to shape this internal discussion in Britain. What they have is, they have put up a very brave front. They have said, look, we can't really offer you a better deal. What we have given you is the best possible deal under the circumstances, which Theresa May was trying to tell her party members. But when Mr. Johnson comes and says, give me a better deal, European Union is standing firm. And for them, standing firm is important because they don't want to set a precedence. Tomorrow, other countries would come and say, we want to leave European Union and give us a deal. So I think for them, it is very important that they convey a message that they are standing upright, that they are standing tall, and that they are not being seen to be giving in to the pressures from Britain.
So, in your opinion, how do you weigh this, the benefits versus the risks of Britain leaving the European Union? What should be an ideal situation, really?
Benefits, I think, are quite self-evident because Britain has lived with the European Union. It has been part of European Union for so long and has benefited tremendously. Costs, I think, as I was saying earlier, they are largely nebulous at this point. It's not we have made certain claims. People like Mr. Johnson and others who want to get out of European Union have made certain claims. But it's not entirely clear whether those claims can stand the scrutiny of facts. And I think a lot of those claims have been found to be false or negative, that the kind of savings that many people were contemplating is just not happening. Because Britain will now have to produce an entirely new template of governance, of engaging with the world, and that would involve costs. So I think opportunities, of course, will come once the deal is in place, or may come once the deal is in place. But the benefits are there, and benefits are there for all to see. And therefore, for many in Britain, and especially I think the governing class, beyond this, this nebulous sense that let's get our sovereignty back, which has been one big sustained campaign in Britain, that you can't really cede your sovereignty to Brussels, and Britain as an independent sovereign country should have control over the decisions that it makes. Beyond that, there is no substantive benefit that Britain derives. There is a question of migration, of course, where the issue was that, and when the Brexit debate was happening, a lot of the people were concerned about migration from European Union. That a lot of migration is happening, and because Britain is a wealthy country, a lot of the people from less wealthy countries in Europe used to come to Britain. It was the first port of call. And this became a major issue, how to control migration in Britain. But whatever evidence we have so far, it tells us that even after you have this deal in place, Britain will have to come to some sort of an arrangement with individual countries in Europe. It's not entirely clear what better deal they can have in terms of even controlling migration. So yes, there are some positives that you can reach out, but I don't think they anyway outweigh the costs that Britain will have to incur if this decision gets operationalized.
Okay, and since we're always bothered of how it affects India, a last question, you've also written about it. How can India make the most of it, of Brexit? How does it affect India, or can India use it to its advantage?
India, I think certainly if there is a transition where both sides come to an orderly conclusion about their future, then I think India can use Europe and Britain as two major economic actors to its advantage and leverage both of them. Now, in the short term, of course, a lot of Indian companies have decided to move out of London, because London used to be the entry point to the larger European market. Now they have there's a move towards moving either to Germany or to France. We'll see how that pans out. We don't exactly have the numbers at the moment, or exactly the decision has not been taken because of this uncertainty. But I think once Indian corporate sector decides that it is more, where the larger benefit for them lies, India can certainly leverage in its negotiations with both countries, because both European Union as well as Britain would be very keen and continue to remain very keen even under these circumstances to have a free trade agreement, for example, with India. So whether India can leverage that to its advantage would be a very important question for India, and India certainly can do that. But I think India will not take any step till the time the mess is sorted out in Britain and between Britain and European Union, because there's no point in India even starting a basic negotiation unless it is clear about what is happening in Britain. And this was a message that even when Theresa May visited India after the Brexit, and she wanted to move forward, India gave this message that there's no point, there's too much uncertainty. And once Britain is certain about its future, India can be certain about the bilateral.
There's a lot of uncertainty right now. Thank you for explaining that to us, Professor Pant. Right now the situation is there's a big mess. There's a mess inside Britain, internal politics, as well as mess between European Union and Britain. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Ideas Factory.